So now let's discuss about the Hamming loss. Hamming loss is quite simple, where we have, let's say, if we have to create the Hamming loss between y hat naught and y hat, so where this is your predicted and this is your actual. So the formula for them is going to be this, which is 1 going to be divided by number of data set samples. Basically, this d length means that total number of samples, how many total number of rows you have. Then here we are computing the XOR value for it, for my prediction as well as basically with my real output. And this is length of L, basically, which means that how many total number of labels we do have. Now, if you recall, basically how my how my XOR gate kind of works. So XOR works if you have both the values as different. So let's say if I have 0 1, the output for this is going to be 1. If I have 1 0, the output for this is going to be 1. But if I have 0 0 or if I have 1 1, in that case I'm always going to get across 0 0. So if they are different, then only I will get 1, otherwise no. So this is going to be the part. Let's take an example to understand this part. So now, if in order to take this example, let me create some space for you so that I can probably put down this example easily. So now, let's say I do have some sort of Q1, which is, let's say, this. Now here, if I have, let's say, question 1, which have the tag, let's say, T1, T2, T3 and T4. Let's say this is the situation. Now this is my actual output. Okay, what I predicted from here is, let's say my prediction is, so here basically let's say my value was 1. So how we are keeping it, let's say in Y I have the tag present T1, so I will put 1 for it. I have T2 also present, I will put 1 for it. I have T3 also present, I will put 1 for it. And I have this value there, which is I'm gonna put 0 for it. Okay, this is not there, let's say. Now what I predicted is, let's say, is completely opposite, 0 0 0 1. Okay, I predicted completely opposite. Now if you compute the XOR value of theirs, so it's gonna be 1, right? So for the first part it's going to be 1. So for when I did this comparison, now after that it's going to be again 1 here. This is also 1, this is also 1. So if you count it, 1 plus 1 plus 1, which is going to be 4. Now how many total values I have? 4. So 4 divided by 4 is going to be 1, right? So you can think of it like XOR is like how many mismatches are happening for you. So if the mismatches are more, definitely this value is going to be higher. If the mismatches is less, then definitely it's going to be lower value. So that's the reason it is called as loss. Okay, so we want this value to be as low as possible. So this is about the Hamming loss part, which I brought up in the last part. Now what we are going to do next is we are going to work on our data set, and further we gonna use it for our further application. So in order to solve this problem, I'm gonna use something called a SQLite. Now this is just to add a different flavor so that you can understand how you can work with SQLite. Just to let you know, like for example, you might be aware of databases like Oracle, you have Microsoft Server, right? So many databases are there. Similarly, this SQLite is very light-weighted database. In fact, if you basically think about in your Android phone, you save your contacts. So you must be thinking where those contacts will be getting saved. So there is a DB which is involved there, right? So that DB will be always SQLite. Similarly, in your MacBook, in your iOS, everywhere SQLite is used because it's a very lightweighted database to solve this purpose. So, and the very good news here is that SQLite is comes default with Python. So we need not even install something separately for doing it. And the advantage of using SQLite is that you can now write your SQL queries. And if you are not an expert in SQL and all, don't need to worry about that. You can just follow this link, W3 School. And in this project, I'm not going to use very complex query. It will be very simple queries. So if you just spend half an hour here, you will be all good with SQL knowledge. Okay, this is just something you can follow up here and then come back to this project. But if you know it, then you will really understand things quite well. Now, in this case, what I'm going to do is, So first of all, we got the data from Kaggle in CSV format, right? So we have the train.csv format there. So what we are going to do, we are going to read this data and basically going to dump all this data to something in SQLite. So I'm gonna put this complete data into SQLite DB so that I can write my SQL database. So this is what exactly this line of code is doing for me. So you can see that df.toSQL. I'm basically writing all this data and keep on appending each row one by one. So that is what I'm doing in the first line of code. So once I'm done with this, then after that I'm just basically counting the total number of rows being present there. So now I'm just basically connecting to my DB which I have created, and you can see that I'm just hitting a simple SQL query, select count asterisk from data, and saving it in num rows. And now I'm just printing this numbers, right? That's it. So now when I'm printing it up, so this came out that it have almost like so many records being available, almost 6 lakh record, and the time which it took to count this is, you can see that it's so low, right? Almost 1 minute 15 seconds. Imagine this was a huge data. So SQLite kind of a very fast way kind of go and kind of can read all this data. Now going ahead, the first thing we have to look at is, do we have any sort of duplicate data with us? Now in order to do that, it's quite simple to achieve this. And always remember, whenever you are working on any database, for example, you can see here also I'm working, whenever you are opening any database connection, always make a good habit of closing it as well, otherwise you may end up with a lot of issues. So always remember to close it. It's a good programming practice. You have to do that. By default the connection might not get closed, so you have to do it explicitly on your own. Now going ahead, now I'm going to check for the duplicate. So first I'm again going to create a connection with train.db, and now what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit this query, read underscore SQL.query, and if you see this particular query, what I'm doing here, so I am basically doing a count, select title, body, tag, count as string, as I'm just giving a name to it from this data set by, but basically from this, but group by, I'm doing it for all these three, because wherever all these three are commonly occurring, then do a count of it. So if there will be any duplicate records kind of thing coming up here, that will be caught. And this basically took me almost like 4 minutes 33 seconds to get the result. Definitely the data was huge, but it gave me this result. Now if we see this data, so this is how the data will look like. So now you can see here that let's say this part of the question is only occurring one time, but this part of the question, if you look at, is occurring two times. Okay, so means this is maybe a duplicate question. Similarly, there are lot many other duplicate question, and if I count that how many duplicate questions we got, it's almost a huge number, which is like 30% of the values are duplicate. So it's always a good practice to remove the duplicate. Otherwise, how they will be useful for me in analysis, right? It's just the same data getting repeated twice. So we need to remove them. But before that, we can do some more analysis. So what we are doing is we are just checking here that so there are this many number of questions which is occurring single time. These many number of questions are occurring two times. These many number of questions are occurring three times, and in fact there are basically 5 questions which are occurring 6 times also. So which is basically a huge time of duplication, but it's not too much high number, like 5 questions are only occurring. So what we would like to do is, so let's say if there is any question which is or basically there is any part which basically question is there which is, let's say, occurring two times, so maybe we would like to retain one of the question and remove the remaining part, right? So that is what I would be doing in the next steps. So what I'm going to do now, before even now cleaning this up, I'm also going to count that how many total number of tags are also here. So for example, here you can see that I have a tag C++ and C. So this is basically going to be counted as 2. Similarly, here we have C sharp, we have Silverlight, data binding, and basically we have columns. So this is basically 4 number of tags. So this is also one thing which we are doing a count. So we are doing nothing but you can see this code. We are looking at only tags, and we have applied the lambda function, which is just looking at the splitting part and looking at the length of this basically code. So this is how we are basically kind of counting all this value, and you can see here it is showing me up the values of tag count. Now once we have done that, you can also see here very interesting trend. So there are basically the number of questions where three tags were there are three in number. Sorry, this is number. This is the number of questions where we have basically these tags occurring so many number of times. Similarly, you can also notice this part, like you can see that there are questions even where we have five tags, and this is a high number, not very high if you comparatively see from here, but this is also high in number. So this is a nice insight what we are getting from the data. Now let's create the data basically with no duplicate. So once we will do this up, then we're gonna store the no duplicate part into my DB again. And once we save it up, now we're gonna use that not no duplicate kind of data. So I'm gonna use this no duplicate data, and from here I'm just pulling out this tag data, means I'm just pulling out this tags from here so that I can use it later. And at the same time I'm just removing any unnecessary column from here. And for doing this it took very less time, as you can see that though the data was huge, but now after removing almost 30% of the data, we are not left with too much as well. So we are pretty much good with this particular data. So now after this we have to perform some analysis on my tags and all, which we are going to do in further lecture.